Now and then we'll start. Okay. Let's see. Events. Okay. Join in. Okay. Oh. Turn off that so there's no sound. And okay. I'm getting an echo. That might be from my phone here. Move it. So is the echo. Okay. Awesome. Okay. So I want to make sure I'm getting feedback. I think there's a little too. There we go.
Still there.
Is the echo still there? No, there's nothing near me. This is my standard position.
Let me move my phone. I'm getting an echo also.
You are.
Let's try this again. Let's see.
Yeah, I don't have an echo. Do you?
Yeah, we're better now.
Okay, much better. Awesome. Okay. Let me minimize my screen. Put you there. Okay. And then my questions. Okay. I did a thorough review of your LinkedIn, obviously, as you can see. Okay, wonderful. So I'll do a quick kickoff. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Accelerator Insider, where we go behind the scenes to talk to the folks who are building incubators, accelerators, and studios across the U.S. to think about how they build businesses for today. Thank you so much for joining. And so actually, Sue, if you mind, I want to make sure I don't mess up the name here. Can you share your full name and kind of what you currently do in the space?
Sure. Hi, Dominique. So nice to see you. Thanks for having me. I'm Sue Heilbronner, and I am the co-founder of the Merge Lane Fund, which is now how we refer to ourselves.
Yeah, perfect. So, and I'm really excited about this conversation because I've been tracking accelerators for a couple of years, but kind of started more formally last year. And there's so many. And so the fact that you went through the journey of having one and transitioning out of one, I just think is an important story to tell, because there's this kind of idea that like once you have one, you're always going to have one. And what I'm finding out is that many of them are changing, shuttering, shifting. And so there's a lot more happening beneath, underneath kind of what people think is the case around accelerators, their intention, their purpose, their goal, and how they operate in their ecosystem. So very excited for this. I think there'll be a lot of lessons learned for people right now who are looking around going, I have this accelerator, but, question. So I'd love to jump in first. I mean, people can go and find you all over the internet. They can also find you on LinkedIn and kind of learn about your work, but maybe just start from the very beginning. So you have a varied career in tech, and academia as well, and legal as well. Can we just talk about your first company? So it's called babyshowermall.com.
Yes. Well, the first actual, okay, let me take a step back. I was being a lawyer at that time. I was with the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, and the internet was just coming in. It was 1999. So the internet was coming into my consciousness in a big way. Like the way for anyone who remembers this, it was sort of like next level after AOL mail. I was sort of understanding what was going on. So this is a very long time ago. Some of you have only seen this in movies. And I got very excited about what the potential of this vehicle could be at that time. So I decided to start an e-commerce business at night from my basement while I was still practicing law by day. It was early 1999, and everyone was talking about Y2K and the new millennium and the whole thing. So I started hearing my friends, I was of that age at the time, they were talking about having millennium babies. I'm like, oh, that's cool. People are interested in millennium babies. Why don't I just create this ironic apparel brand for millennium babies and millennium parents? And I called it, the first name of that company was Y2 Wear. with a Y and a 2, whatever. And I didn't have any experience in anything about that business, the internet, apparel, babies. I didn't have a baby, never did have a baby. Anyway, so totally underqualified, or unqualified is better. Ultimately, I realized one of my early business lessons was never start a business that has a 1-year time horizon. So I grew that business, but then I just thought, oh my God, it's 2000 and nobody's gonna be talking about this soon. So I changed the name to Baby Shower Mall. What a terrible, looking back, like just hearing you say it, what a terrible domain, but it gave the business a little more evergreen features.
And so what was, so I mean, all of that was just a nostalgic moment, because I remember Y2K having to stay at home at my parents' house. They would not let me go out for New Year's that year.
Oh,
And just kind of,
really?
yeah, and I graduated actually high school in 2020, in 2000. So it was like the Y2K year. So there's a lot of, and the Yahoo, like I remember Yahoo, like clear as day, like after AOL. And so, yeah, so I could understand that it was a new space, but probably tons of market share opportunity because no one was on the internet yet.
Totally.
What was your biggest insight from that experience? I mean, you took that business, and if I'm correct, that's what you sold as well. So there was some growth there, or do you think of it now looking back like it wasn't really what what it was intended to be?
It was amazing. And I think the biggest takeaway that I got there, and the reason I ultimately left the law and transitioned into business, was having the experience of being one person in a basement with a brand and being able to communicate to the world as if I was a giant company. It's still the case that not that many people know the difference between large companies and small companies on the internet, except to the extent of advertising and seeing sort of dominance on social media, which wasn't true in 1999. So it's not like I look like Macy's, but Macy's wasn't doing very much on the internet. So just having this store, people thought they would call at that time, we had 800 numbers that you actually use because it mattered. So they'd call the toll-free number. And I remember, they'd get me because they didn't want to order on the internet because they didn't feel safe of doing that yet. And they'd get me on the phone and I'd answer and they'd say, Sue, I think I talked to you 2 weeks ago when I called to order. I can't believe how lucky I am to talk to you again. And I just thought, that's hilarious, right? Because I'm the only person you're going to talk to for the
Right.
foreseeable future. So that was really, really a big learning. It's actually, we'll talk more about, I think we're going to talk a little bit about sales in this conversation. And I recently sold a book on that topic. And it probably was a very formative experience for me in selling. Including selling startups, which is if you can convey a sense of scale, not falsely, but like that there's a vision that's big enough, again, without lying, that you are more likely, in my opinion, to get investors excited. In the same way as conveying a sense of scale or being on trend with this little company, Y2 Wear, made people think it was larger. And that is just the miracle of tech. That's just not true if you think about a brick and mortar store or even a booth at a trade show. We've all been to trade shows where some of the booths are 10 by 10. You're like, oh, little company. And then you go to the Intel booth and it's 70 by 70. And you're like, okay, big company. So
Right. No, that's great. And there's just so many things about what you just shared that I just feel like are lessons for entrepreneurs right now, actually, because venture has taken the world by storm, and some of the tried and true practical applications of how to build something are just in there, like building it, you have a job and you're building on the side. Like, first of all, I think right now the language, like, quit your job and build this thing, or if you want to get into an accelerator, you have to quit your job and build this thing. And I'm like, even with a $120,000 check from wherever, after taxes and paying people whatever you got to pay, you have no money to live. And so there's something about the, like, honoring the simplicity of building something, and understanding that if you go slow to go fast, in a sense. It's like
yes.
really important. And I think that's been a little bit lost, because they go, oh, well, what about competition and market size? And if I don't go fast enough, I don't run. And it's like, actually, the slow actually is what gets you to the fast, because it's what allows you to understand your actual target market and your value prop so well that you get something sticky at the core that people can't compete with over time. And that's actually the competitive advantage that you build by actually going a little bit slow in the beginning. Is that what you experienced by default of
Yeah,
doing?
right. By not knowing what I was doing. Yes. And you said a couple things there that really resonate with me. One of them is this idea about slow and fast in the startup and fundraising context, venture-backed company context. And I think there are two things I want to talk about there. One, and I just love how you said it. So many companies look like overnight successes in year 8. They finally get traction, and then something, and everyone thinks, oh, I never heard of that company before. And now it's all hearing about, and they think, oh, they must be brand new, overnight success. And usually there's a ton of work that goes most often ahead of that. However, there are exceptions. And then we hear about those. And in my experience, people in startups think that is how it should be. And I am with you. And in this climate, it seems even more true that priority one is just building a great business. If you can build a great business, not only do you get all the benefits you just talked about, product market fit and everything else, to actually have something that's real, but then you have optionality about how you're going to fund your business. Venture-backed funding is one way. Being an accelerator is another way. Funding your business from customer revenue is a third way. And it's one very, very few people talk about.
Yeah. And most people right now, I mean, we'll talk about this as we go forward, because you're on the funding, side, not your investor side, that the market, the U.S. market fundamentally is a pretty saturated market. We are the consumer class of the world. I mean, we have just, we consume everything here. So there's a lot of stuff in the market. So it can be really challenging to be like, why is this cookie going to sell better than the cookie next to me on the shelf? I mean, that's a real experience people are having. But then you have to ask kind of a different question, which I think folks are not asking right now, which is like, why am I building this thing? Like, why am I personally, I've heard a lot of people say like, when I had a small fashion tech company, and I know nothing about fashion. I'm not even like stylish like that. And I was like, I should not have built this thing, right? Like, the problem I had in the beginning made sense. The problem as it evolved did not make sense. And that founder industry fit piece, people really neglect to like understand in the tech world, because they think, well, I can just build this thing without having a deep understanding of the problem. And what I'm seeing, and let me know if you're seeing something very similar, maybe a decade ago, what was highly valuable was the tech and the IP. We've kind of surpassed that. Unless you're doing something like very core to the building blocks of AI or the building blocks of blockchain or something of that nature, there's not that much new tech, or maybe something in the emerging category. It's not that much new tech. You're really using other people's tech to build. And so you end up in a situation where the value today of the founder is your channel partners. It's your sales pathways. It's how you're going to get customers. And that comes from founder industry fit. And it's less about, I have this cool new tech, because you probably don't, and much more about, I have these deep relationships, which is the competitive advantage. Are you seeing the same thing? Is that like not the case? Is it really more, no, we're still all in the IP game and the new tech game? Or is it really like, no, the sales channels are becoming hyper valuable?
Well, I hadn't ever had the thought that you just articulated, and I think it's really wise. And I don't know a ton about, for example, what ChatGPT is doing, but apparently in the latest release of the paid version of ChatGPT, they have disintermediated a ton of companies that were building wrapper applications around ChatGPT, which is a really good example of what you're talking about. And I also really appreciate the way there aren't that many people, in my experience, that make the connection between founder market fit or founder product fit or founder company fit and sales execution via network or whatever else you're doing. And so I love that you're making that connection. The way I think about that in my work, because you also know that I do a bunch of conscious leadership coaching and facilitation I shouldn't say on the side. That's the main thing I do. That's my job right now. We'll talk more about the accelerator in a moment, but is getting that kind of alignment between I was just watching a show about Ikigai, getting that alignment between what you're good at, what the market wants, your network, all of the things, so that everything is totally lined up, makes you a selling machine, especially early in a startup's life. So I really like that contrast you just made. There's one other thing that I just want to add to that I've observed, which is some people are great at that. Let's say I've seen a bunch of founders that are really good at that, and they have amazing networks and they know just how to use them. Mm-hmm. One thing I've experienced, and this is just a story that I make up looking out at the world, is some companies believe that they have product market fit and it is fueled by the quality of their network and sales execution early in the company's life. And then after the founders have sold this concept to all of the people in their network, which can be a lot, like it can look like millions of dollars in new ARR and blah, 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 all of the things, they hit a wall. Because what they actually had was what you're talking about, founder product or founder company fit with network, but actually not product market fit. So I just want to mention that I see that. And then the symptoms of that are 2 years in, churn starts to spike. The founders played out their networks, and they have to look really hard at what they actually have on a product market fit side. It's just an opinion.
So that's super helpful to actually call because out loud, and we'll jump into this next topic. But to add to that, because I think what people forget is every tech business in the beginning is just a small business. And most small businesses in the first 2 years run through their natural networks to do sales. And so usually within like 6 to 8 months of your first year in business where you're actually selling, you just have to start cultivating the next network, because it's almost all referral word of mouth if you have the founder industry fit, right? And so that journey is very similar in those early days. And folks, you're right, do one or the other. They either have that network, and so they sell to that, but they haven't really worked on their product because they're miscuing, right? Or they have this product and they have no one to sell it to.
Totally.
Right? So it's like it is a little bit more. It's an art and science thing, and so it's like figuring out what the right mix is. But it's right to call that out, because I think tech founders think of themselves sometimes differently than small business founders. And actually,
oh boy, thank you. It's like, I don't even need to be here. You and I are in such radical alignment about this point, which really syncs up with venture funding, because it ends up, we can start talking about accelerators and funding, because I think a lot of founders miss that point. Like, we're just a small business. It is not inevitable that we will get venture funding. It is not necessarily required that you get venture funding. And if you think of yourself that way, then you have options. You have much more power in the market to choose your destiny.
Exactly. So let's jump ahead a little bit here. So I did want to pause on. So you sold your company, or got acquired at Discovery. It's a big company, and you went from a really big organization working in the legal field to then kind of going small to then going big again. What was that experience? Because most founders don't make the journey. They don't stay on board. They don't stay internal. What were the challenges of that, going into that big conglomerate with your company?
Yeah. So what you're describing, I just want to be clear about this, is I was at the Department of Justice practicing law, which is a giant organization. By the way, it's also one where whenever you pick up the phone to call anyone, they take your call. When you're a federal prosecutor, everyone takes your call. It doesn't matter. They're on the ski lift in Aspen. They're taking your call. So that was kind of interesting. I had this little startup on the side. So I didn't one thing to know is my career makes it look like I'm courageous, but I actually didn't make any courageous moves. I did this thing on the side while I could pay my mortgage. And then when I just fell in love with business and fell in love with selling, I realized that I didn't know very much about business. I knew how to build this tiny little company. I was actually in the right place at the right time. A lot of acquisitions took place in 2000. There were significant acquisitions, often stupid acquisitions. So I could have had one of those, but I had no idea what I was doing. So instead, I decided to apply for quote unquote real jobs. And at that time, there were way fewer startups. It was a totally different landscape. So if you really wanted to learn business, you would get a real job, and a real job meant at a large company. At that time, I applied for 2 jobs. One was with a startup still, which was the Motley Fool. And one was with Discovery Communications, the parent company for Discovery Channel. That company is now called Discovery Time Warner, which is a gigantic conglomerate. At that time, Discovery was independent and had 5,000 people. It was still obviously much bigger than my one-person startup. So I want to just mention that was actually a safe move, I thought. I mean, it was 2000, and then .coms blew up in 2001. So it ended up being more risky than I ever thought it was, but it was a pretty safe move. I just wanted to learn the fundamentals of business from people who knew what they were doing. So it was awesome. I walked in on my first day, and 2 things happened. One is I had a director title. Now, I had no idea what that meant. I wasn't qualified to really do much of anything, but I got this director title. The only reason I got it is that an ex-lawyer was part of the interview flow at Discovery. So I think he thought like, well, I made the transition. She probably can too. And so that happened. By the way, I sold my first company to a colleague at Discovery, not to Discovery. So there I was, doing online biz dev at that time. And my first day, my boss asked me for a P&L for an acquisition. So just think about that phrase, P&L, P&L. Sounds like one word, right? So I had no idea what that was. And he told me verbally. And so I had to call a friend who was a CFO and say, what's a P&L? I had no clue, and learned that it was profit and loss statement and that it was an abbreviation. And then I learned that I was going to make it in Excel. And just so you folks know, they didn't used to teach Excel in school. So I had to go to the bookstore, they were everywhere at that time, and buy Excel for Dummies so that I could create a P&L, which I just learned about an hour before, for my boss for a possible M&A deal. And that all happened all in my first day of work. But the second thing that happened was I was a director, and there was another director of something in my group, and she had an MBA. And she was very proud of that, and very dismissive of me. So she called me into her office to have a lovely get to know welcome conversation. And in the course of that conversation, she explained to me in very passive aggressive terms how unqualified I was for my job, by the way, something I already knew, and how I had no business having the same title as she had, which she was probably right about. But it was a great first day.
Not the, and all of that's just a beautiful story, because I laughed to myself thinking about my first job out of grad school was working in government, or for the city of Philadelphia, with the new mayor coming in, and my job right after that was they moved my department. I used to do workforce development work for the mayor, whatever, moved it to under the finance department. I did a short stint there. I know nothing about finance. I got a new job at the school district doing contract management. The first day, hey, Excel, can you do this thing? I go in there. My boss comes out. He goes, so we're not going to use Garmond font 14. We're going to use Arial. We're gonna reset. But to your point, you don't learn those skills at all.
That's funny.
And I don't know if people. And today it's interesting because, and I love. Okay, we have to move to the next. But I asked you this question about what you're seeing too. I've been hearing the last 10 years. We've been hearing a lot of, your area of genius. Focus on your area of genius. Don't worry about the other parts of the business. You can hire someone for that. You can bring in a CFO. You can bring in whatever. And for the first time in a long time, out loud, I'm hearing, know your cash flow. Understand your mechanics, unit economics. And it was always true, but it was never really said as a core priority. It's no, you just have to go sell, or you have to do product, whatever you know how to do, and then someone else will help you that. And I'm like, what business person in the world would be I don't know. But I'm still finding that people are they don't know how to run their business from the economic perspective. Are you seeing that shift? And are you also, when you look at companies, you're thinking to assess, are you a strong company to invest in? Are you looking going, do you understand the mechanics and levers of your business?
Yes. That's really, by the way, so I'm a conscious leadership coach. I spend a ton of time on Zone of Genius, which is a phrase created by Gay Hendricks in his book, The Big Leap, just to shout that out to the universe so he gets the credit for it. And I spend a ton of time on that. But one thing I talk about is, hey, when you're a startup, somebody has to do payroll and figure out if you're going to use whatever, Gusto or Paylocity or ADP or whatever the heck you're going to use. Somebody has to figure that out. And then somebody has to figure out how to do it. And then somebody has to press a button every couple of weeks or twice a month. And not only that, somebody has to clean out the refrigerator. And that is often one of the early employees who is doing that stuff. So I am a firm believer in everyone getting as close to the P&L as they can. An area where I see that come up at times in companies that are a little further along than that we're talking about is, say, the first HR person, where the HR person is charged with recruitment and benefits and culture and all that stuff. And in my opinion, the strongest HR people are very well acquainted with the P&L. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, no, that makes tons of sense. And then, okay, let's talk a little bit right before we kind of get into the accelerator piece. You also worked for a venture-backed company in 2007. And how was that? Well, it's kind of pretty clear how that experience probably is different from your first experience, but what was some of the insights from that? And then do you feel like that is what really got you into this particular space of venture-backed investable companies?
I don't know. I don't The answer of how I got in, I'm sure it was formative and created some reason why it would make sense for me to co-found a venture fund. All of our experience, this well, because you've had so many different lives, wraps up into even what you're doing right now. You're not just here with today's knowledge, you're here with knowledge from 20 years ago. So I'm sure it's a part of it, but my experience working in venture-backed companies is not to me, the main difference that I got working in those companies at those times was that there's always a conversation about the board. That's all. And there are always conversations about funding, and there are always conversations about where cash is, and figuring out strategically where the next opportunity might be for the next inflection point and how you might get there. But when I was in companies that were funded by outside investors, those relationships were always very solid. I now coach a ton. I think all of my clients are venture backed. Some are PE backed at this point. Even in all of those relationships that are current clients, those relationships are all very collaborative. The board is there to be supportive, to find blind spots that the CEO might be missing, but very supportive. Now, that's not true everywhere. And you have seen this in that, with the economic conditions being what they are and fundraising being what it was in 2019 and 2020, a lot of boards have gotten much more active, and a lot of companies are having to do down rounds or having to go away or having to sell in really, really disadvantageous ways because they burned through a ton of money. In those cases, boards have gotten much more active, moving CEOs out, treating these companies as turnarounds. So I've seen that. I've seen both examples, but I don't really think I was highly influenced by working for venture-backed companies.
I think that's really helpful to say out loud to folks too, because I think people kind of really think it's this really sexy thing. But when I look at it, I'm like, no matter how it goes down, if you're a company under 30 million, maybe 50 million, it's kind of, again, it's tried and true business. You're all in the same place. You're a mid-market company. You're trying to figure out how to sustain and grow. You have a board. You have active, hyperactive sales teams. Like, you're just, the work is the same. Maybe there's a little bit more of a buzziness because it's a little bit, the learnings are newer perhaps, and maybe they're more even because there's more people in the pot in terms of how to make a decision, because you have that board that's active.
Right.
Maybe something more, maybe feels a little bit more, I don't say chaotic, but there's just a little more activity that maybe makes it feel a little bit more stressful, or more like you have to put more work into thinking and making decisions. But functionally, it's like the same experience. Like, so if people think it's like really sexy to work at a startup, but it's like not sexy to work at another company. I'm like, they're all the same company. Like,
that's a great observation. I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So I'd love to talk a little bit about the Accelerator. So if you want to just talk a little bit about what brought you to develop it, what did it do, and kind of your journey on that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So when I started my coaching and facilitation business, one of my clients was a company that put on startup community events and startup educational events that at that time were live. This is in 2014. And I was working closely with them on growth strategies and some of the conscious leadership stuff, but mostly on growth. And so there was an event, and there were panels on a bunch of different topics related to tech startups. And one of them was on marketing. And I wasn't in charge of any of the panel cultivation or the agenda creation. That was handled by the company. But I attended some of these panels, and I attended this panel, and it was on digital marketing. And on the stage, there were 7 dudes. And not only were there 7 dudes on the stage, but it's digital marketing. If you spend any time in tech, you know that it's probably the case that the majority of digital marketing leaders and team members are women. So to have 7 men on this topic, this was not, I sometimes joke, it was not a topic on how to use a urinal. It was a topic on digital marketing. So I now call those manels. And I just got mad. I was just seething in the audience. They were all dressed. They all were wearing gray slacks and navy blue blazers. So they look like exact clones of each other. And I just got mad. And I came back home from that event, and I just thought, I thought this was better, but it's still happening. And if this is looking like this on this panel, then of course, the product and tech panels are all men. So then basically the percentage of women speaking from the stage at this conference is awful. Yeah. And I called the one person who was an angel investor that was a friend in my town of Boulder, Colorado, Elizabeth Krause. And I just said, I'm just pissed off and I want to do something about it. So I don't think angel investing is enough. Like it's small stakes. And at that time, there still are some angel groups that had a reputation for being very process heavy and lots of stages to get an investment of like 25 grand. I just told her, I do not want to do that. That sounds insanely dull. My personality doesn't work like that. So I had been a Techstars mentor. We live in the town that Techstars was founded. So we're very familiar with that model. And I just said, let's have an accelerator. And I don't just want to have an accelerator for female companies because that sounds the opposite and not better. So let's just be sure that any company we bring into the accelerator has at least one woman in leadership, which was a different standard. We were quite early in 2014 doing anything like this. And we talked to a few people. Most of the seasoned investors told us not to start an accelerator. We later learned what they meant. It's a lot of work. We'll talk more about that, I imagine. And gosh, within 3 or 4 months, we had raised our first accelerator fund, which for us was $20,000 for each company we took into the cohort. And then we raised a side fund to make further discretionary investments in any of those companies that we liked for that year. We continued that accelerator process. I think we ran 3 accelerators, 3 accelerator years. And then migrated to letting that go and just being an investment fund instead of an accelerator plus a fund. So that's the journey.
I mean, I know. I mean, I see all these accelerators all the time, and I'm like, to me, it's a tremendous amount of work. It doesn't, it's interesting, right? Because the democratization of access is a good thing fundamentally, but as you democratize more things and the funnel increases, you have to create more processes and tracks and ways for people to funnel through that. It creates this ecosystem and economy for any new thing you want to democratize. So venture capital is happening. That's happening right now in venture capital, right? So that's what happened to accelerators. And so to your point of like, you have this program, you're doing all this work, but then you look and you go like, well, is the yield worth it? Like, is it like the time worth the effort for the outcome, given the fact that we know about companies, period, and how they most will close and so on. So yeah, I'd love to know, like, for you, what was the most like challenging part of running it? And when did you look at it and go, this isn't yielding what I was expecting it to yield?
Yeah, well, okay, a couple things. In the course of running this thing, we had amazing support. So I say it was hard, and it was, it was a lot of work for 3 months, but a year. I mean, and before you had to recruit all the companies and then run the thing. And, but I had great people involved. I just want to mention again, my co-founder is Elizabeth Krause. Our third team member for our first 2 or 3 years of the program was Hannah Davis. And then we were joined by another team member, Danielle Dannenberg. And they all contributed to the success. We also had a coach in residence, Leah Perlman, involved in what we were up to, and 100 mentors and an amazing array of investors. I mean, I won't say we were lucky because we did a lot of work, but we did enough work to get really, really lucky in who was involved. And so I don't want to say it was hard. And to be candid, our first accelerator fund is very much in the money. The returns are extremely strong. We don't talk about them publicly, but that took how much did it take? It took 8.5 years for that to really be fully realized for that first fund. So actually, I think things are going to play out great. Our first fund has a significant multiple of returns. And we still have a bunch of companies, not a bunch. We have 3 companies that are still doing great in that fund. So actually, I think there's going to be more. And I think our other funds are just aging quite well. And by the way, the accelerator model, when it works, is fantastic because if you're able to get good companies in the program and give them $20,000, invest $20,000 as we did in exchange for 6% of equity, we followed something similar to the Techstars model, although for less cash. And they don't get wildly pushed down and diluted in the course of running these companies, which almost all of our companies have not. Things can go great, and they don't have to be billion-dollar exits to be great. They can
Yeah.
be $40 million exits and be phenomenal for the
Mhm.
founders, for the employees, and for the investors. And so we've had some of that very, very good fortune because we have worked with some great people. So I don't know, it was just a lot of work. You had to work every day, and a lot of people wanted to be with you, and organizing all the different levers that had to be involved in any kind of, you've been in education. So, like running an educational program has a lot of levers. We really were bent on creating an extraordinary experience for folks. So, we invested a lot of time and love and energy.
Yeah, no, I worked with a venture studio for a while, and to your point, I think, and you look at accelerators, and they're different, slightly different models, but it's really about, can you bring this dearth of resource, to people consistently through their journey, and so, which is very taxing and very time consuming. When you think about and also on the return side. So you said something that's very interesting, which funds are now starting to talk about, but I still think it's like super new because, again, venture right now is like a vibe. It's like, it's cool. As my managing partner says, like, it's a vibe, and it shouldn't be. It's an asset class, and very serious about that. That the challenge is that, there's like a tried and true kind of book around venture capital, and the power law is part of that story. And then when you talk about it as an asset class at like a private equity level or institutional, kind of those bigger checks and the bigger investments, they understand that they kind of are completely comfortable with, hey, this company's going to 3x, this one's going to 4x, and these couple might 10x. But that's like good portfolio management. But
Yeah.
in venture, it's like, well, 7 are going to die, 3 are going to win, right? And it's kind of like this, it kind of fabricates in that way. When you talk about your companies from where you're sitting at the early stage of investment, are you looking at companies that are, this is like a complex question I'm asking here, so I'm sorry about this. Are you looking at those companies and saying, when I look at you to invest in you, I'm assuming, I don't need you to shoot the moon. When I'm looking at the company right now at the early stage, I need just to get the return. And I ask that because angel investors will often ask, what's your exit strategy? What's your acquisition strategy? And venture capitalists will like never want to hear that answer because they want you to say, I'm going to shoot the moon. And they're like different goals of investors on your cap table. So that was a really messy question, but I don't know if you can
Yeah,
answer.
That's fun hearing you talk about that. I really appreciate the wealth of your knowledge on this. I'm really getting a lot out of this conversation, so thank you. I want to clarify a couple things. One, we did this accelerator, then we ran a fund. We just made our last investment from the Merge Lane Fund 2 months ago in a
Oh,
company called After, which is at after.com. And it's a digitally enabled cremation business. Very, very excited about it, even though it's, who wants to really be talking about death all the time? But the way they're doing it is super cool, efficient, and environmental. So I'm psyched about it. It's a great way to end the fund. So I just want to say I am actually doing right now no investing. I don't intend to do any angel investing. The way that I am now sort of in the market is there are instances where a company wants to work with me as a coach or a facilitator, and I may take a portion of revenue as options in lieu of cash if it is a mutual win. Which is complicated anyway right now, given where valuations have been. And that's kind of a fun discussion in any event. But that's really the only way I'm playing right now. That's sort of recent, but it's true. When I was looking at early stage companies, honestly, my assumption has always been that, and this is not unique to me, that people are what I'm investing in, and I want to be around extraordinary people, and maybe it'll be that company or maybe it'll be the next company, and either way it'll be so much fun and so much learning to get a chance to be near them that I want to be near them. That has always probably been the most important thing to me at this early idea stage. It's like, who knows? I mean, most of these companies, especially at an accelerator stage, are just brand new ideas. So we historically were more often talking about, do you have any evidence of traction? Any evidence that people like this idea? Any evidence that people are using your product, even if you give it to them for free? And are you extraordinary? So that if you end up not having product market fit in what you're doing now, are you going to be able to pivot into something based on that learning for which you have better product market fit. There have been a number of companies that we invested in as one thing in one industry and became something totally different 6 months later. And a couple of those have been really strong exits because the people were so great. So I don't think I have an opinion about shooting the moon. Shooting the moon seems to me to be such a low percentage shot. I don't think we were ever that focused on it. And we were early enough that didn't have to happen. Obviously, hey, if it happens between you and me, fantastic. That'd be great. But I don't think it was ever our focus.
Interesting. Okay, so I know we're close to time. I have 3 questions left. The last 2 are pretty straightforward, but this one is about sales. So I think, sales is interesting because if you go online right now and you say, oh, I do sales, you look for a job in sales or whatnot. It's like, do you know how to use a CRM? And you have 7 years doing LinkedIn marketing and all this stuff like that. But I look at almost every startup founder and I'm like, they're not doing any of that, right? But they are selling all day long, right? And you moved into like revenue and sales roles.
Yes.
And a lot of folks I know who do chief revenue officer don't have finance backgrounds. And so I just want to understand from your perspective, like when you got into these roles, were you like, I'm prepared for this? Or you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about because this is not how I built my capacity around this thing. It wasn't in this traditional format.
Dominique, for me, I have realized that the thing I have always loved and always been best at was selling. So, and I could not agree with you more that selling is the most critical criterion for a startup founder, except perhaps a core tech person in an organization. They still need to sell their ideas across the company, but I don't think they're in as much of a sales role. But I could not, I just finished, I wrote a manuscript for a book that I just sold to a big 4 publisher. It's not announced because the title is not settled yet. So we're still working on the title. But it'll come out in 2025. And it basically is about aligning the things you're good at with what you're selling and what you're passionate about. And if you cannot do that, or you think you don't do it, or you think it's a bad thing to do, sales itself is bad, please don't, in my opinion, lean into being a startup CEO, because you, in my opinion, in the first year or 2 of your company's life, your number 1 job is sales.
Yeah.
And I just think it's critical. Now, I think you need to understand sales in a certain way. And this book is about the concept of what I call passionate ambivalence, which is just another thing that I think I have seen, especially working with so many women-led companies, that founders don't grip soon enough, which is this process of starting a new business, trying to get investment, trying to get traction, is not about asking for favors. It's about letting people understand that you are onto something authentically, and that if they don't jump in now, they're going to miss a big opportunity. And to me, that is a core element of successful selling.
You very much have the law of attraction there. It's like care, but don't care, right? It's the do the best you can. And then when you put it there, when you put it down, don't pick it up, let it do its thing. You got to let the world show you what it is, right? It's very much that internal knowing. And probably that's true for most of our founders, like ones that do well, it's like that. And you always have moments of risk or concern or fear, but that the knowingness is stronger than the fear, right?
Totally. And if you just heard Dominique say the law of attraction and you want to learn more about it, go read about the law of attraction. It's good stuff. There are a lot of good books about it, and it makes perfect sense in this conversation.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a good frame for that ability, I think, to your point, but that knowingness. And so, yeah, so you said a lot of amazing things. So maybe in that statement as well, with the sales, and I think a lot of folks, the first 2 years, to your point, need to learn how to sell. I mean, a lot of people, in programs who are like, I'm going to hire a salesperson. I'm like, no, you're not. You need to learn how, because you can't give that playbook to someone else to sell on your behalf. I mean, there's 2 real concerns, right? One, you bring someone in, an advisor, whatever, who has the sales channel. They own the relationship. You don't. Your product's super early. So that means they're going to start looking at your product, trying to tweak it because you don't have enough grounding in what's core about your product and your value prop to hold it together. So they're going to start with saying, well, the client really wants this instead of what you have. And that's going to mess up the team. I was like, and when you actually need to hire other people, you won't know how to teach them how to sell because you won't know what the customer really wants, right? And so that, you know, understanding that's a critical part of the journey. And if you have something you build, you should want to sell it because you care about it. It should be something you want to do. It's a good signal. I mean, I think, entrepreneurship to me is like, I think it's like for people who want to evolve their soul as fast as possible, it's like become an entrepreneur because it's going to force your every part of your nature to have to adapt, change, fix, review, like deep soul searching. I mean, I saw a woman yesterday who she had a nonprofit. She had to close 3 years. She had a nonprofit, and she was just crying. The grief that she was going through, just crying from having to close it. Like this is a soul's journey, right? Being
Yeah.
materialized, right? And so it's like when you do those things, it's like your most vulnerable part of you, and you create something from yourself and you put it out into the world. And I think for entrepreneurship, I think entrepreneurs need to know that about the journey. That's not just about the money or the product, it's about you, and you're
Yeah.
using it as a tool to evolve, right? I think we kind of forget that sometimes.
I'm sure my favorite quote from this conversation is going to be the one you just said. Something like, if you want to advance your soul quickly, become an entrepreneur. That is just brilliant. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So maybe last two questions here. So, okay, so you work with a lot of companies, you pivoted out of the accelerator, really because I'm assuming because again, the time, and then also you had the fund and you already were doing the coaching. So now when you look at companies, do you assess a company based on if they've been through an accelerator or not? Like, do you care?
Yeah,
Yeah.
great question. By the way, one reason I haven't mentioned that's important and we stopped doing an accelerator really wasn't driven entirely by the work, but it was also Techstars was right next door, and Techstars kept opening new programs all over the world, and they've continued. I think they have 150 programs now. Honestly, we really believed in Techstars, and
Mm,
so they were doing such good work. And they had a
mm,
platform that was so much bigger than ours that they could attract better, just incredible companies.
mm,
So we saw less of a need. Oh, and also when we started our program, Techstars Boulder had almost no women in the entire cohort. Even though they had an MD who was a woman, amazing, Nicole Glaros, there were very few women in the cohort. So that had shifted during our 4 years or 3 years of doing this. So it made a big difference to us to see those changes. We felt not as essential anymore. When I look at companies and they have been through an accelerator that I think is superb, it makes
mhm,
a huge difference to me. I think there are enormous benefits from being in a good accelerator, like mind-boggling. I still mentor at Techstars every year. The
mhm.
changes between day 1 and day 90 for those companies, beyond imagination. The continued changes through the network, beyond imagination. If you can get into a great accelerator, apply.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you said that. And actually, I was in a Techstars company in 2013 in New York, and Nicole was the MD. So actually, yeah, have some familiarity with that as well. But yeah, I think you're spot on about that. How do you? So I track accelerators. There's about four. I mean, I have a little database, about 800 of them. There's about 4,000 in the U.S. right now, and there's new ones every single day coming online. What? How do you know what's a good accelerator? How do you assess it? Is it brand recognition? Is it just like word of mouth, or how do you know?
I don't.
Yeah.
The truth is, I don't. If I were looking at an accelerator, I would really focus on the MD. I think the MD, and they often have an MD, a managing director, and a program director, at least 2 or 3 people. I would really focus on who those people are. I would really focus on the quality of the network around you. If your mind isn't blown by a number of the people that you will get to meet in that program, I don't personally think it's worth it. I think there are other things like your podcast, Dominique, that can be every bit as helpful. And I would evaluate, something that's just life. Like, not everyone can do these programs. Not everyone can take the 3 months. Some companies are not full-time run by their founders. Their founders are doing what I did, which is balancing risk and staying with a consulting job while they're launching this as an experiment. And so for those folks, it's just harder. And right now, I think there are a lot of ways, because of the transparency of VCs like Brad Feld and Fred Wilson and books like Venture Deals. There are so many ways to get quality information that I think there are a lot of options.
Yeah, we get a lot of venture VCs and investors who actually watch this because they want to learn about the MDs, because they're looking for deal flow. They're not, they're not on Harvard's list or Stanford's list to get the best deals or whatnot. And so they're looking at, oh, well, there's 70 other climate accelerators I never knew existed. Oh, there's 5 quantum engineering ones I never knew existed. And it's like, and then they want to learn like who are the people that run them, because to your point, it's like the what do they say? Like the quality of the answers based on the quality of the question, right? It's the same kind of thing in accelerator land, right? It's like the quality of the MD and their experience. One of the things Techstars got really, really right for a long time, and I think even now they bring in really strong MDs, is for like the first, like I think 7 years, every MD had built and sold a company. It was like a requirement of being an MD.
Yeah.
And so that wealth of knowledge,
Yeah.
was so critical to building companies. And so though not everyone is doing the same exact thing, but you're kind of looking to suss out like what's your knowledge base on this topic really, and what should I expect as the outcome of someone who went through that program. Okay, closing question here. So for all new accelerator leaders, what advice would you give them? So if they're just starting one, or they thought about it, or they're in year one, like what advice would you give them to create a really strong accelerator?
Be willing to be flexible about your first cohort and accept fewer companies and better companies if you don't have enough quality companies in your pipeline. I think pipeline is really hard to create, especially in an environment where there are a couple very dominant players. Some of these niche accelerators with specific focus areas, I think, have an easier time than the ones that are general. So I would just say you may set out to have a cohort of 10 companies. And if you get a cohort of 6 companies, that might be just right.
That's really helpful, because I think people do feel like I need to have this many companies or this many companies, and I need this, there's a lot of strategy in building a company. And so having the right people, takes a village, right? And so having the right people around, I think the pipeline is a part of that. And I think that, to your point, the network, like something I think people don't really always understand is like, we know these things, right? They're so like obvious. Like you're always like, oh, your 5 friends is an example of who you are. Like we have all these like versions of this story, right? And then we kind of forget it in acceleration. It's like, oh, right, like who the MD knows, how they're perceived in the market, that how they're valued. Like it matters to the quality of the program. And we kind of forget that there's all these cues that can tell you what the quality marker is for any particular program, right? And pipeline is one of them, brand is another, all these different pieces. And I think we sometimes forget that. And maybe because we're urgent, because we're running a company and we're like, we need this, 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 this. We don't really see it as clearly. Yeah. Awesome.
Sounds good. It was really a pleasure to be with you, Dominique. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat today.
Yes, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of Accelerator Insider. And we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.